Greetings, salutations, everybody. Welcome to AMC Movie Talk for movie fans. As always, I am your host. My name is John Campea. I am the senior editor of AMC Movie News. And today is a little bit different. We are thrilled today to have some special guests in here to talk about a new movie that's opening up, Sinister, which opens in AMC theaters everywhere on October 12th. I think you can get your tickets online now. If not, you can soon. Make sure you check amctheaters.com for your tickets. Saw it the other night. Creepy as hell. And today, joining me to talk about Sinister, first of all, sitting to my immediate right, he is the star of Sinister. I've never seen him in a straight-up horror movie before, and I was thrilled to see him in it, Mr. Ethan Hawke. Ethan, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Sitting next to Ethan, he is the director of Sinister, and you've also probably seen another horror movie he's done recently, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Scott, how you doing? Thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here.
Sitting next to Scott, he is the producer of Sinister. He's also been a producer on other horror franchises that you've seen numbers of times. First, Mr. Jason Blum. Jason?
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Is it Blum or Blum?
It's Jason Blum.
It is Blum. I see. Somebody corrected me earlier.
That's outrageous.
Which is ridiculous. So listen, folks, if you are watching us live, you can check the chat board right to the right of the streaming player, and you'll see a tab there that says Social Chat. Just jump into Social Chat. If you've got questions that you have for Ethan or Scott or Jason that you would like us to ask on air right now, just start firing them in. And sitting at the back table is Jennings Roth-Cornett.
Hello.
Who's normally up here with me. She is monitoring the chat board. She will take your questions, and when we come to that point, she's going to ask the guys what you want to know. Until that time, though, I've got a few questions myself. Ethan, let me start with you. As I've mentioned, I can't recall seeing you in a straight-up horror film before. Was there any apprehension on your part to get involved with this because of that genre difference? And what was the attraction for you when you were first looking at this that made you want to be a part of Sinister?
Well, let's see. Okay, how do I answer that question? When I was 13, I did my first movie, and it was Explorers, and I was taught about the movies by Joe Dante, who had been a film director totally a part of Roger Corman's wheelhouse. He had directed The Howling and Piranha, and he had these very, very strong theories about what makes a good genre film and how important they are. And he didn't think of them. He preferred B movies to A movies, particularly if they were done well. And part of it had to do, in his mind, with A, the quality of the acting, and B, that to truly be punk rock, you had to have a subversive message to the film. It had to first of all be scary.
Right.
Or that's the genre. If the genre is horror, it has to be scary. And then it also has to have a subversive theme. And so I'd always wanted to do one. But the problem is a lot of the ones that are really successful don't necessarily require acting to be of a certain degree. Obviously, a lot of the best ones have great performances. But so my friend Jason loves horror movies and has been making them, and was coming at me and saying, you should really do one. And I basically said, well, when you have a great filmmaker and a great script, let me know. And
he did turn down quite a few. Not that they weren't great filmmakers previously, but he did turn down. I kept knocking on his door, and he kept closing it in my face.
And he said to me, he called me up, he said, I think I've met a filmmaker that you're really going to like. And I met Scott, and Scott, the way that he talks and thinks about movies was so much in line with the way that I've been educated about movies. And I recognized a really serious filmmaker right away, and so I wanted to be involved.
Jason, let me ask you this. Having worked on projects like Paranormal and things like that, we see a lot these days, which has really made popular the subgenre of the found footage film. One of the things that I found most fascinating about Sinister, that I don't think I've ever seen before personally, was it's a real hybrid of the linear narrative with the found footage subgenre mixed together really effectively. What was the key, do you think, to making that type of a hybrid work?
I wish I could take credit for that. I think Scott's the one who made that work. The only credit I can take for that is that I was really compelled by the idea of mixing very old footage with a traditionally shot movie. And I liked a lot of things about the story when it was pitched to me, but that was something that I liked a lot. But Scott was able to really figure out how to make that work in the context of the movie.
Can I give you a compliment, Scott?
No. No, go ahead. I'm going to change my mind on that.
Well, the other thing is that a lot of the found footage movies, they, in an attempt to go for naturalism and to create something scary around being, uber naturalistic with this found footage, they give up a kind of poetry and a cinema quality.
Right.
And your use of Super 8 and these movies, they're so cinematic in a way that a lot of the other found footages aren't. When you first showed them to me, I got so excited about the movie just because I could really, for the first time, see the movie in your head. And there's kind of an elegiac quality to them that the other found footage movies don't have.
It's the reason why I can't imagine myself ever making a straight up found footage movie, just because of what I like about cinema, and that found footage movies have little or no score, usually no score, and they're shot with video cameras meant to look like video cameras, and I like the filmic quality of movies and sound design and all the things that you can do with cinema. And with this movie, when my writing partner Cargill brought the idea to me, what was immediately interesting to me was that it's not a found footage movie. It's a movie about the guy who finds the footage.
Right.
And I thought that was cool, and I thought that was a good place for this genre to evolve to.
And Scott was, when we were making the movie, Scott was happily really insistent on doing that part of the production first, which he got a lot of resistance to because it was slightly more expensive, and it turned out to be exactly the right thing to do, to have that so Ethan could see it.
To me, because I got to actually sit there and you could just play it for me and film me watching it, and that was
so his reactions to the films are his reactions to the films.
It's great, really
as opposed to talking them through.
Now it's going to be when I do it in post.
One of the things that I really appreciate about this movie so much is that, I've said for a long time, if you're going to make a comedy movie, you can get away with a lot of mistakes if you make the audience laugh. If you're going to make a horror movie, you can get away with a lot. But the key thing is the unforgivable sin is not to make it scary. And one of the things I loved about Sinister is that a lot of horror movies will rely on a certain type of scare. They'll either go just for the psychological scare, or they'll go for the jump out of your seat kind of scare. And I found that you took the walls out. As I'm sitting there watching Sinister, I'm realizing there are a lot of different levels of scare in this film. Roth, who was sitting at the table back there, as a matter of fact, I'm sorry, I'm going to let this out. She was sitting beside me at the screening, and every time I wanted to look over to her to kind of mention something, she was like this. She had her face covered most of this movie. As you guys, Scott, as you're approaching making fear a part of the film, why does it work so well in Sinister, and what was the approach you wanted to take to try to bring that experience to the audience?
I remember the first time that Ethan and I had lunch in New York when I was trying to convince him to do the movie. A big part of the conversation back then was that I wanted to make a movie about different kinds of fear, where there was multiple kinds of fear at work in it. And so, the atmospheric, kind of dreadful, ambient fear of the movie is certainly there, and that's a lot of that has to do with the soundtrack, with the lighting, those kinds of things. There's definitely some big jump scares in it, but they're earned. I like a good jump scare as long as it's not a false scare or a cheap scare. But I think that that the films that are in it, the Super 8 films, there's a voyeuristic quality in them that is a different kind of fear, because it's almost like the fear of, I shouldn't be watching this. It feels there's a wrongness to it in a disturbing way. And then for me, the deepest layer of fear, and I think the most interesting layer of fear, is the fear in Ethan's character, because he's a guy who's driven by his fear of losing his own status. And there is something about a guy who is so gripped by his own fears of not mattering enough in the world, or losing his fame and fortune. And I found that in a horror film, that extra level of character fear, to be what made the movie worth making.
See, that would be the layer that Joe Dante would say separates the men from the boys, so to speak, is that what's the underlining movie about? Right. What's it about? And this is a guy who lets a demon into his own life and into his whole family's life through his own ambition, the door of his own ambition. But then you said, or we said together, that the truth is you can make a great character piece all you want, but if it isn't scary, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, scary is scary is what matters. It's like if you can have everything else you want, if it's not scary, you totally failed.
Yeah. All right, let's see. We're going to throw it open to you guys on the chat board in just a second. Remember, fire your questions off into the social chat tab right beside the player. We're going to get those in just a second. Ethan, I had another question for you. You know, the film's scary, so it works on that level, but I find beyond just being a good horror film, the thing for me that makes Sinister work is the fact that I got to be able to buy into your experience with the supernatural, that I'm looking at how you react, and I was just floored sitting there watching, because a lot of this film is shot just you watching a film, you know, and your reaction to it and the way it just builds and mounts. As you guys were talking about your reaction, how your character deals with this found footage stuff, how did you want to approach it? Why did you choose to react to them a certain way? And how much of that reaction was like maybe your actual reaction the first time you saw the Super 8 footage?
Well, Scott's big challenge to me for making this movie was how nuanced to fear can you get? Because like if you see a romance or something, you know, there's so many different gradations to love and how you're falling in love, or if you see a movie that's all about anger and stuff like that, there's so many but yet there's this kind of tendency. Fear is it's a emotion we're all scared to touch.
Right.
Particularly, you know, part of why I think a lot of actors are nervous about doing genre movies and stuff is that so many emotions are sexy. You know, there's an emotion, being vulnerable is sexy, being angry is sexy, being in love is sexy, being scared is not sexy, right? No, but yet it's a really omnipresent emotion in all of our lives, and it has a lot of nuance to it. And Scott's challenge to me was, how many different kinds of fear can you show me?
Right.
Where is it? How can we let the audience into the full experience of that? And I remember you talking a lot about Shelley Duvall in The Shining, because Jack Nicholson gets all the credit, you know, here's Johnny and everything. But the person who sells that movie as scary is Shelley Duvall, because she looks terrified
when the axe is coming through the door in The Shining. The look on her face, I think, is the most afraid anyone has ever looked in the history of cinema. It's amazing.
She looks scared for her life. Yeah. And you feel like that woman's life is in danger, and that's what makes Nicholson scary,
right?
You know, and it's a very old, you know, acting is reacting, all that kind of nonsense you hear all the time, but it's also really true. And so for me, Scott knew it was important. He had those films to show me. Scott, like all the best filmmakers I've ever worked with, the movie existed in his head already, and he's just trying to make it come alive. There's a whole period of the film where the movie gets really quiet, and so any choice that I would make if it was too loud, Scott, no, that doesn't work for this part of the movie, because the movie's got to come down here. And knowing the music of your own film.
When it was interesting, the first time that we met, I remember Ethan saying, you know, I get scared in horror movies. I get really scared, so I haven't seen a whole lot of them. And he said, I'm not sure I understand how to make one of these. And I remember saying to him, well, just don't think of yourself as being in a horror film. You know, your character, Ellison Oswald, isn't in a horror movie. He's in his own drama, you know, for sure.
And he wants it to be a drama about a guy winning the Pulitzer.
That's what he wants. That's it. And you know, and there's these other things that are scaring him, but the thing that scares him the most is I gotta succeed. And so the result is Ethan's playing multiple kinds of fear at, you know, all kinds of levels all the way through the movie. And I think that, you know, fear, maybe next to sex, is like the greatest driving force in culture, you know, and to not take that emotion seriously and not make movies about that is to miss out, you know. That's why I like the genre.
And I love the fact that you had the story of your character, about his life, his ambition, because horror works best, I find, when it's a lot of horror films just give you the supernatural, or they give you the psycho killer in the forest and the guy's got to run from him. The fact that you create this real world problem that I think a lot of people and viewers can identify with, ambition and maybe reaching for the glory of the past, and then you drop the horror element within that real context people already relate with, I think that just heightened the fear so much. And a lot of that is
it makes it scarier, because you know, anybody who pays to go see a horror film, what they're paying for is to get scared in a safe environment. So the scarier it is, the better it is, simply put. And I think that the way that you make a movie truly terrifying is getting them invested in that character.
Absolutely.
As long as they're really into that guy, and he's a flawed character, but the audiences who've seen this movie so far, they're fascinated by him and they stay with him, and that's why the movie is scary.
In a way, that's what Spielberg is the great teacher about that. I mean, what separates Jaws, what so elevates it, is those guys. are so real. Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, Roy Scheider, all three of those guys are totally full three-dimensional human beings that happen to be being chased by the great white shark. Yeah. And so if it were just generic cardboard cutouts chased by a shark and it was all about the shark, I mean, that's the mistake people usually make, is they make the movie all about the demon.
When we go out to make these movies, with financiers, often they're reverse engineered, and it causes a lot of problems. It's like, what are the 8 jump scares in the movie? And there's always the focus when you're going into these. What are the jump scares? What are the jump scares? What are the jump scares? And the jump scares are the easier part. The hard part, the jump scares only work if you're emotionally connected to the action on screen. That's the hard part. It's like, you should be saying, tell me what the story is here. And the jump scares then be easier for me to say than a director, because I'm not one. But the jump scares can get more easily laid on when you have the audience connecting with the story.
That's movie making. That's the same thing that's true of a romance. What's the moment where I'm going to fall in love with the characters? Just worry about putting real people in a situation that is going to engender that. Or the comedies.
Comedy's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's funnier. What's funny is when you believe the action in between the laughs are much funnier.
Right. You brought up Roger Corman earlier, and Roger Corman, and you brought up Jaws, and Roger Corman said that Jaws was the movie that destroyed his business because he was making all these low budget, scary movies and monster movies and that, but with no characters in it. And Spielberg came along and said, I'm going to put some real people in one of these, and he made Jaws, and
changed the game
completely.
We were actually just talking about Jaws just before we went on air. Roth was asking me what was the movie that scared me most as a kid. I said, Jaws. Hey, listen, for those of you who don't know, and by the way, we're now going to get to the part where we're going to take your questions from the chat board for these guys. And for those of you who don't know, something very interesting about Sinister. Very rarely, now granted it's early, but very rarely will you hop over to Rotten Tomatoes and see that a horror film has 100%. Well, it's very rare you see any film have 100% rate. Right now, if you go over to Rotten Tomatoes and you look up Sinister, a 100% critic rating right now on Rotten Tomatoes, which is almost unheard of.
100% fresh, by the way, not rotten.
Yeah.
just so we're clear.
We're very proud of that. We're very proud of that.
Not just spin here. So Roth, what do we have in the chat board right now?
Well, we have some questions coming in. Magnus Rex said, wow, that's a really interesting point about fear. And I absolutely have to agree. I think the movie does a great job of illustrating the different kinds of fear that we all let run our lives. So the question is for Ethan, what are you using to access those variances in fear? I mean, are you at a certain point thinking of something that's physically threatening, something that's emotionally threatening? Like, how do you sort of access the different aspects of fear?
Yeah, it's a really smart question. It's one that I'm always hesitant because I don't think, I mean, obviously you asked it, so you're interested in it. I always worry that whenever actors start talking about something Uta Hagen said or something that nobody really wants to hear. The older I get, the more childlike I try to approach all these things. That the more available and awake and present you can be to just what Scott said. You're not in a horror movie. It's happening. It's really happening. It doesn't matter if you're doing a scene, where if doing some scene in White Fang with some dog, this got to be your dog, and you got to love this damn dog, and you got to really try to say goodbye to the dog. It's all so simple, and the more you can fully inhabit your own imagination, the more alive that comes for the audience, and it's very hard to do. It's so simple, but it's really, really hard to do because our imaginations collectively are so much more powerful than our intellect. Anything I can think of, wouldn't it be great if we did this and that? Yeah, it might be. But really what's great is to be in a room with talented people and to just play and hope that something, then when the light, we had a lot of fun making this movie and there's a lot of iconic imagery at play. This movie plays with all of it. The attic, the man watching movies he shouldn't be watching, the tree. There's some ancient scary imagery that Scott is evoking. And if I just give over to that, usually it happens by itself.
Here's a question, actually. I have this question because I understand that this was inspired by a dream by Robert Cargill with the first image of this film. If you guys see it, you'll see it's terrifying. How did you guys collectively come up with the following images that we see in the film, because they're all equally terrifying?
Well, yeah, my writing partner, Cargill, saw the movie The Ring and had a night. He did what you're not supposed to do, which is he came home from seeing The Ring and then took a nap, which is true story. And he had a nightmare about going up into his attic and finding a box of films and watching the first film, and it was the opening scene from this movie. And so we had to get 5 more into the movie. And I'll give him credit where it's due. I remember I was working on other scenes in the movie, and I said, why don't you just go away this afternoon and see how many ways you can think of killing people, and just send me back a long list. And he did it. And he took like 6 or 7 hours and sent me back a list of 35 horrible ideas of different ways that people could be killed on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We both went on the most wanted list immediately. No, but I took some of the ones that I liked the most, and then we sort of split those up and started working on them. And they all work in different ways. And so far from audience reactions and from the test screenings and all of that, they seem to be the things that connect the most with the audience in terms of what's disturbing about the movie, and what's deeply unsettling and deeply frightening about the film.
We got time for like 2 more.
Great. Here's one from Dave B2X, and he wants to know, Ethan, have you ever encountered a ghost in real life, or do you believe in the paranormal?
Oh, good question.
Have I ever encountered a ghost in real life? It's one of those. I feel like it needs to be really late at night, and we should. Before we could talk about that, because whenever in daylight, I definitely have.
Yes.
But to talk about it always somehow makes it less.
I'll rescue you a little bit from not having to embarrass yourself. I think the most interesting thing about that question, and one of the reasons, maybe the reason why I believe in ghosts, every person you will meet has either seen a ghost or they know somebody credible who's seen a ghost. I mean, it is amazing how prevalent the stories are.
And Jason doesn't like to talk about it, but he had a very, very,
I did too. But we better not talk about that either. But exactly.
But we're not.
This is true.
Very petrifying experience.
Yes.
But I definitely have had. But I would need to be looking at your eyes to talk about it. Okay, to make sure you weren't the ghost.
So here's another question from Magnus is, what films were you looking for inspiration when making Sinister? Now, my understanding is that you looked at The Shining, but you looked at the scene with Jack going crazy alone. Is that correct?
Well, one of the things Scott was trying to teach me about, in this conversation we're having about fear, with Shelley Duvall, about like if you watch that scene without her reactions, it's not scary. But were there other films that we thought about?
The Shining was the main one for those really seriously frightened scenes that mostly come later in the movie. I think the other movie that I think had a lot of impact on both the way I made the movie and on certain procedural scenes was Brian De Palma's Blowout.
Yeah.
Which I gave to Ethan to watch.
Such a great film.
And I told Ethan, I said, there's a lot of scenes in this movie of him, at his desk editing these Super 8 films and working with them and looking at the computer and studying things and trying to figure out the mystery of this movie. And I said it can be very compelling and it can even be scary. Watch Blowout, and I think that bled into the movie pretty nicely.
For sure.
Yeah.
Blowout is such a great movie. Okay,
and The Changeling was a big influence too.
What's one of the best performances in a horror film is in Exorcism of Emily Rose.
I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it?
Yeah. Oh wait,
you need to check that out, Scott.
All 3 of the actors are great, but Jennifer is unbelievable.
Jennifer Carpenter as Emily Rose is incredible.
It's a phenomenal performance.
Yeah.
And having now done a horror movie, it's like there's a certain genres of movies that people talk about acting as if it's great. There's a certain kind of performance they love, but yet if you go see Eddie Murphy in the first Dr. Dolittle or something, his performance is absolutely through the roof amazing. But people don't talk about that kind of movie. Jerry Lewis gives some amazing performances. And in a lot of horror movies, the performances get ignored. And there isn't anybody who gave a better performance that year than Jennifer did.
Totally agree.
It's just... People, there's certain movies are in kind of their own ghettos. There's the Oscar bait movies, and they think those are great performances. But what Jennifer did is truly put herself out there and really gave herself to a role in a way that, you know, Daniel Day-Lewis aspires for. I mean, I just think it was
totally agree. Yeah,
really special performance.
It was to watch her scream like that with intention for 8 hours straight in a shooting day. You know, it was amazing.
I know how hard that is to do.
Yeah.
And you know, all the great actors throughout the history of film, you know, you have to really risk being foolish.
Right.
You know, and a horror movie really asks you to do that. It's kind of swing without a net. I mean, your net is your filmmaker. Anyway, I just wanted to give that little shout out to her.
Awesome.
You know.
That's great.
Well, listen, folks, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you so much for. I know there's probably a bunch on the.
There's a bunch more. People are dying to know about you. In this
Sorry
movie.
about that, guys. We're really sorry, but we have run out of time. Guys, listen. Sinister, as a reminder, opens in AMC theaters everywhere on October 12th. I can tell you honestly, creepiest film I've seen all year personally. Don't just take my word for it. Jump over to Rotten Tomatoes and see what all the other critics are saying about it right now. Ethan, wonderful performance in the film.
You.
You sold the film to me. Scott, I think this is now my favorite film of yours. Actually, I loved this movie. Jason, again, great job. Congratulations. Where can we find any of you guys on Twitter, by the way? Jason, let's start with
we're
you.
at Blumhouse, and we have a Facebook page too.
All right, we'll make sure we'll put that up in the show notes.
Great.
I'm at Scott Derrickson, my name. And anybody who emails me questions who didn't get through, I promise to answer them all.
Yeah, me too. We will answer all of your questions.
Send them to Jason.
Yes, I'll answer all of
We
Ethan's
can't just put your
questions
phone
too.
number
It's
down
at,
at the bottom?
at
Yeah.
Blumhouse.
Send them to Jason.
Send them
will
to
send
me.
them to me, and I'll answer any
Yes.
questions. It just might take a day.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you check out AMC Theaters on YouTube, which is youtube.com/AMC Theaters. To check this video again later, in case you've joined us late, you can see the entirety of the interview there. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks to Roth. Thank you to Dennis over there who's running this thing. And thank you again to Ethan, Scott, and Jason. Don't forget, go and check out Sinister. It is worth the time. My name's John Campy, and until next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button below. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and join us at amctheaters.com, and watch one of our other AMC Movie News videos below.